Hey, welcome back. And today I wanted to actually talk about this interesting story that is in the Bible of a blind man that was made to see. And it's actually recorded in different verses in different books. This concept of a blind man made to see. Now, of course, this sounds like a great miracle and something absolutely wonderful if a person is physically blind and they were suddenly made to see. That would be marvelous. That would be some majestic thing to occur for such an individual, but also depending on how long they've lived, it might actually be absolutely shocking as well. If you think about it, if you live in darkness for decades of your life and suddenly you get to see actual physicality, yeah, I mean, I can't imagine what that would be like after such a long time of not really seeing anything at all, because if you close your eyes, I suppose that is sort of what being blind is about. There are different degrees of blindness, I know, but some videos I've seen, people would say that were born blind, that they only saw darkness. It's an interesting subject and an interesting thing to actually listen to. But for this video, I simply wanted to talk about the spiritual angle, what it means when a blind person is made to see. Because we could ask ourselves, are we blind? You could ask yourself, am I blind? I can ask myself, am I actually blind? And then you're like, well, I can see. Right now, I can physically see what I'm doing. That I'm looking at my webcam right now. I'm holding a microphone in my hand. I see all this stuff. But yet, am I actually blind? And if we understand this from a spiritual angle, we're going to discover that yes, for the most part, we're actually blind. Like, as weird as it sounds. So, let's first go over these verses that I jotted down here as some notes. Where in John chapter 9, there were these verses that Jesus said, "For judgment I am come in this world, that they which see not might see, and that they which see might be made blind." And some of the Pharisees, if I pronounce that right, if not, sorry, but they heard him with these words and said unto him, "Are we blind also?" And Jesus said unto them, "If you were blind, you should have no sin. But now you say, we see, therefore your sin remaineth." So really suddenly here, it's actually talking about something very spiritual, at least in my opinion. And that I think is interesting to consider for ourselves, regardless of whether we are truly physically blind or not. So what can we learn from this? Well, I wrote down, "They which see not might see." That's what Jesus said, that he wanted that those who cannot see might end up seeing. It means they which do not have spiritual sight, from the third eye, the spiritual imaginative sight and awareness, might gain it through Christ's teaching and application. They which see might be made blind means to turn our sight away from physicality and its apparent limitations, to behold the greater, this greater spiritual realms of life. So you see, if you already are not familiar with this spiritual sight, then you're essentially blind in that regard. You're blind spiritually, you could say. When Jesus said they were blind, they would have no sin. So if they would stop indulging in sense perception and limitations only, they will stop sinning. But for now they say, we see physically only, so their sins remain active. So the only true divine sight is granted spiritually by God itself, through the power of Christ in us. But physical sight based on sense perception is limited, and is also only aware of the realm in which we all sin and miss the mark, make mistakes, succumb to temptation and limitation. We don't live up to the highest good in this physical realm more often than not. I mean, this is something we have to face. Sometimes it's hard and intense and kind of disturbing to have to, consider this, that perhaps we're not really living up to the highest good at all, even though we're studying it. But that is only due to a particular blindness on our part, spiritually speaking, that is not allowing us to truly fully perceive the spiritual unity that we have with God, with the universe itself. So these Pharisees were also described metaphysically as our senses, constantly trying to mislead us away from truth. In another part it was written Jesus had to leave the temple, which a temple metaphysically is always the human body, in which Christ dwells in all of us. So the reasoning mind and senses want him to leave with the spiritual perceptions. It disturbs the ego at first, But then it said after he left the temple, many believed on him, and even some Pharisees did believe but kept their mouths shut out of fear for being removed from the temple as well, for they loved the praise of man more than they loved the praise of God. It's all in the book of John, which does give great insights on the matter how Christ consciousness works in us. This is so important that if you understand that there's a part of you that is very physically focused, and that's usually how we're raised. Once spiritual perceptions enter the picture, enter our consciousness, then there is this conflict within us between this physical programming that's running in our minds and the new spiritual revelations that are occurring to us and that are brought to us. Because of that, there's this conflict, and you feel perhaps in a way disturbed within your very being, a little uncomfortable. You start to realize more and more perhaps all the silly things that you have been believing and doing that held no actual value in the long run at all. That is what it's talking about, that there were people that believed on Jesus in this case, but others, even though they believed, they kept their mouths shut because they rather went along with the human law and with the way humans think things should be and society things should be, because otherwise they might stand out and be condemned, be criticized for that. And some people find that too scary, so then they ignore the actual spiritual truths when they come to them. They rather still bow down and obey the old habitual ways of society instead of the enlightened ways of Christ or any other spiritual awakened teacher. So this is stuff that we have to keep in mind. If you're currently blind, which we all are in a sense, we're talking about being spiritually blind. If you have no awareness or perception of your own spiritual nature, then you're blind. But we're talking about spiritual blindness here. It all makes sense for me from this angle. So how did Jesus make these people to see again if it's from this angle? Well, it's all symbolically written what he would do, like put something clay on the eyes, stuff like that. They all have a particular metaphysical meaning, most likely, that even though I have been studying them and looking into them, I haven't memorized or went over every single little symbolic word in the Bible itself, because it's absolutely huge, we all know this. But in this case, all you have to remember is that right now you see the physical world, you experience it through your 5 senses, but there's also a spiritual world, and you experience that when you're normally asleep at night. Those dream realms, you could call them spiritual realms as well. The problem is that we're usually unconscious, and then we wake up and we don't really take it serious that we actually saw a different world. But the more you take this serious and consider, well, what I was dreaming, yeah, we know this, we are dreaming at times. But then to actually also say, that must mean I saw it with my spiritual eyes. I saw this spiritually speaking, not with my physical senses at all. And if that is true, then there must be a way to experience this more and more deliberately and consciously, and actually grow in wisdom and awareness on this area of my own existence. And as you open up yourself in this direction, that is when your spiritual eyes start to open. That's the symbolism. They start to become more active. Your own spiritual sight becomes more developed, active, and you become able to perceive more and more deeply within your own very being, within the nature of yourself, and ultimately the universe at large. Because it is true, it might sound bizarre to some people, it still sounds bizarre, but if we're talking about this world, this is only one tiny fraction of existence that we're experiencing. And if the statement is made, there's worlds within worlds, we're talking about something you cannot even truly fully comprehend. Even I can't fully comprehend it. I don't know. You see, infinity can't be comprehended. Let's be honest here, that's the thing. But to know that there are worlds within worlds should pique your interest, in the sense that if that is true, then I must be able to find proof of this. And how do you find proof of this? Well, by stop being blind. By actually learning to see. And we're talking about to learn to see spiritually, from the true nature of your very being. That part of you that you are, that you truly are, even if your body were to shut down and stop working. That part of you that is total pure consciousness and experiences all kinds of realms. And then wherever that will lead, deeper and deeper towards the infinite kingdom of God's bliss. Well, that's what this journey is about. You see, Sometimes, I wrote this down actually for myself that I wanted to share. Sometimes I'm still slightly shocked at the majesty of it all. How grand and majestic life becomes if we enter Christ consciousness. Even grasping it slowly shows you a gigantic different perception of life itself, and how little this physical life plays a role in it, since the heavenly realms are much greater, as it was mentioned through many, scriptures, from many enlightened humans in their own ways. Some would say the physical realm is a shadow, it's a reflection of the astral realm. And above the astral realms, we start going more and more closer to God's realm of infinite bliss. If you just consider that this to be the case, then I think you would agree, doesn't that show how majestic life actually is, and how mysterious but also amazing and fascinating it is to actually explore this consciously and deliberately for yourself, so you're not just focused on 5 sense reality over here only. Of course, don't be stupid and get yourself into all kinds of troubles because you were kind of purposely being oblivious to everything that your senses are telling you, but also don't shut off your own mind from these greater realities that exist, that have been spoken about throughout all the years, throughout these thousands of years by now, and even before the Bible, etc. were written, humanity was already doing it in their own ways. There are scriptures from even before that time span that the Bible was written that are still talking about this in their own ways, from a different angle, perhaps different words, but all of them seem to suggest and say that there's this spiritual invisible realm that we can experience for ourselves, but it happens once we awaken to this reality, to this part of our own existence, which is all part of getting rid of that blindness that we initially work with in our lives. So this to me is the angle of what it means. The symbolism of a blind man made to see is the symbolism of someone finally learning to see and experience and perceive their own spiritual nature once and for all. So they can no longer forget about these experiences. They have had the experience, they know it happened to them, they have seen and witnessed these beautiful things for themselves, and now they're no longer blind to the spiritual nature of themselves. It's no longer just a theory or a hope. Well, this sounds like a nice message, I hope it's true. No, it becomes like, that's interesting, I have experienced this for myself, I have seen this for myself in different ways perhaps, but I have experienced my own spiritual sight. And again, I kid you not, I have done this through meditation as well, where I rest this body so deeply that out of nowhere I could see. Even though my eyes were closed, the body was basically asleep pretty much at that point. But suddenly I could see in this darkness that you normally see with closed eyes. So suddenly the blindness vanished and I consciously experienced this. I deliberately went there. I won't say it was necessarily easy, and that's what tricks people up. It's not something that necessarily happens for every one of us instantly when we try to do this. To consciously enter the dream world, other realms, to perceive things with our eyes closed. But you see, it tricks people up because then they give up if it doesn't happen. They might think, well, maybe it's not true at all. But if you keep practicing it, no matter how long it seems to take, then eventually you will be blessed with spiritual sight. And you finally realize, whoa, perhaps I was indeed blind all this time to this greater reality, this greater realm with which I am one. That is the beauty of being the children of God.